Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches. Today I'm joined by Godfrey Bloom, MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, former member of UKIP and standing down from the European Parliament at the election this month. He left UKIP last year after making a number of comments that his party found regrettable. He referred to the Third World as Bongo Bongo Land, to the women of his party conference as sluts, in the sense of untidy, and he did some very mild violence to an irritating journalist. No violence today, please, Godfrey.
I can
Welcome.
promise you. I can promise you. Thank you for inviting me.
You were a UKIP member of the European Parliament until last year. As we proceed today, can I take it that you still are a supporter of UKIP and that you advocate their policies and wish the party well?
Well, I certainly advocate the policy of leaving the European Union, and I wish the party well, and I shall be voting UKIP in May.
Can I ask about some of the more recent comments members of UKIP have made? Bongo Bongo Land and sluts seem extremely mild compared to some of the things that have been said since your departure by other members of the party. One member has blamed flooding in southern England on the legalisation of homosexual marriage. Another, who is in your poster boy for the party, suggested that Africans should be left to slaughter themselves. Recently, a very large donor to the party has suggested that there can be no rape within marriage and that women should be legally obliged to wear skirts. There are some funny opinions going on in UKIP.
Well, yes, they are. Certainly my stuff does seem rather mild by comparison, doesn't it? Of course, I would argue that anybody who joins a political party is slightly crackers anyway, any party. And I think I would argue that UKIP has no more or no fewer fruitcakes and loonies than any other party. And I'm quite sure as a journalist you've been to perhaps a Liberal Democrat Party conference and I think they are rich in equally eccentric characters, and I don't think the world's any the worse for that. Yes, of course we've doubled our membership in the last 18 months. The membership's gone from sort of something like about 20,000 to something like 40,000 in 18 months. So there's a certain bandwagon that's happening at the moment with UKIP, with all this new membership, and we've obviously taken on one or two extra fruitcakes by the sound of it.
Well, they seem to have got quite high in the ranks of the party. I mean, using one of them to be the poster boy in a film, a man himself actually born in Africa, who that's not just an eccentric view that Africans should be left to slaughter each other. There's a hint of malice in there.
I would agree with you, yes. I think it's appalling. I don't know how the chap crept in under the radar, but he clearly did.
You mentioned that other parties have their own fruitcakes and crackpots as well, and no doubt you do. Worse than that, recently we've had Maria Miller having to resign from the cabinet because of fiddling her expenses, Patrick Mercer resigning from Parliament because of taking cash for questions.
Yes.
Other parties are not exonerated by any means from their bad apples. But if UKIP's own policy is not itself one that might appear malicious, certainly it seems to attract people who have malicious ideas of their own. Why did they go to UKIP rather than to other parties?
That I couldn't possibly tell you. Certainly we do not allow anybody who has had previous membership of the BNP to be a member of UKIP, which tends to sieve out the more potentially malicious members. Whether they come to us or specifically, I think is because it's still a small party, and it's very much easier to find advancement in it than it might be with a huge party machine like the Conservatives or the Labour Party. I think that could happen. I mean, we've got people quite senior in the party, and I honestly couldn't tell you where they came from. I mean, we've got a party chairman at UKIP. No idea what his background is. Nobody else seems to know. He sort of pitched up one day and now he's party chairman. I'm sure he's a thoroughly good bloke, but nobody knows who he is. So, yeah, any voluntary organisation, I think, is slightly vulnerable in this regard.
Is there not a risk, and that is a vulnerability, is there not a risk of a sort of inadvertent infiltration by extremists coming to the party because it's so small, because it's so easy to advance through it, especially if you have anything about you, if you have a bit of charisma? That is the party not at risk of being hijacked?
Yes, and of course we saw that with the Labour Party in the Northwest, didn't we, many years ago? It is vulnerable, But then on the flip side of that is that we are still being a relatively small party, we are very quick to pick up on it and very quick to get rid of people like that. So, and I think it cuts both ways.
Your manifesto headline for this, the European, I'm sorry, I say yours, the UKIP party manifesto for these European elections headlines immigration. That uncontrolled immigration is putting pressure on local services. That's the front page of the document. Will those who are voting UKIP, are they voting for the specifics of withdrawal of Great Britain from the European Union, or are they just, is this a protest vote against immigration? Is this the place, the home for those who dislike immigration?
I think probably, yes it is. I think it's both those things in fairness. I think the thing is with party politics in the United Kingdom, it's generally all about protest. People tend to vote against the incumbent government when they get dismissed, so people sort of voted against Gordon Brown to get Cameron. I think they will vote against Cameron to get rid of Cameron. People tend to vote in a rather negative way, which I think the political system encourages rather than positive. So yes, I think probably it is a protest vote, or a very large protest vote, and I think that says as much as it can about the system as it does about UKIP.
We'll come on to that idea of a protest vote and the role of very small parties in a moment, but it's the immigration issue that particularly interests me at the moment. There will be those who haven't the faintest idea, who couldn't tell you which town the Parliament sits in, the European Parliament sits in, but who just don't like the idea of more immigrants coming into the country. It's a separate issue from the high politics of European destiny of nations. Are you happy to have those voting for you who just don't like foreigners?
Personally, I wouldn't have gone this route with my campaign. As you know, I'm a neo-Austrian economist. I'm married into a Polish immigrant family.
Explain that neo-Austrian is a free market.
Is a free market, and I believe
libertarian.
that if you want to employ a Latvian or a Czech or a Pole, if they're better at the job in a meritocracy, I think that's how it should be. And of course, we both know that a lot of them are. You know, they're very hard-working, they have a work ethic. So I wouldn't go this, I don't hold with this British jobs for British workers point myself. What I would argue is why do we have 30% in this particular area where we're talking, 30% plus youth unemployment, but it seems to me that Poles and Czechs can always find a job. I think that's what the problem that we should be addressing.
Well, why is that? I mean, if there are jobs here that are sufficiently, probably rather low paid, but that a Pole or a Czech or a Lithuanian is willing to have, then anybody who's complaining that their job is being taken by a Pole or a Czech or a Lithuanian has only themselves to blame, because they won't do as good a job for less money. That's just
I would agree, and I think that's also part of, I don't believe that it's possible, which is why I wouldn't have gone this route personally, from a campaign perspective. Just to talk about immigration, I think you have to look at welfare reform and education, not just immigration. I think it's oversimplistic to just talk about immigration personally, but that's the way the UKIP have decided to play this campaign. And one has to be, elections are about winning, and it certainly looks at the moment that they have played the right card, and they're going to win. So who am I to say that they're wrong?
Well, because they're playing a card to win rather than because they're playing a card that's an advocacy of what they believe in, of what it is that they're trying to achieve. And what they're trying to achieve is a removal of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, from the European Union. That's a nationalistic point of view, isn't it? That we should have the natural unit of democracy should be the nation state. Why is that?
Well, I think it stood the test of time, the nation state. I think empires, generally speaking, don't work very well. They become more and more detached from the electorate. You lose your democratic input.
I'll have to come back to that after the break, Godfrey.
Okay.
Forgive me for interrupting you.
Sure.
We must stop there. Please return in a couple of minutes.
Soon to be governed in London, even though they are incompetent, at least they are our own incompetent administrators.
Welcome back. I've been talking to Godfrey Bloom, outgoing MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, formerly of UKIP. Godfrey, sorry, before we stopped, we were talking about the nation state and why you regard the nation state as a natural unit of democracy that should be independent and autonomous of a supranational organisation.
Well, I would argue that you have a stronger democratic input with the nation state. It's more focused and therefore I think more democratic. I would actually go further. I would argue, perhaps in an academic circle, that the city-state is actually the most efficient economic and democratic unit. And you can look at that in the days of the Italian Renaissance. You can look at Genoa. You can look at Venice. You can look at
ancient
Florence.
Greece. The problem is, if you look at
Indeed
ancient Greece, then you have the Peloponnesian War, and Athens and Sparta and Corinth and Thebes are at constant conflict.
Nothing is foolproof. But if you look at more modern times, if you look at post-war, for example, you'll see city-states like Singapore and Hong Kong being absolutely extraordinarily successful. And of course, Hong Kong, the growth of Hong Kong post-war, without any democratic input at all. So it begs another question.
Well, you might be arguing there that the purpose of a successful state is to support its democracy rather than the democracy merely being there as an expedient to support its
It's an interesting point.
Yeah. Why then should Britain be the nation state? We have a nationalism going on within the United Kingdom, as the Scots are potentially voting to separate themselves from the United Kingdom, purely because they'd rather be governed indifferently by people who are also Scots than well by people who are foreign. It could be the other way around, but the point is that the decision about the place of government isn't about the quality of government, it's about we being governed by people like us. Surely that Scottish nationalist argument is exactly the same as a British nationalist argument for withdrawal from the European Union, and as incoherent.
Yes, but I would argue that their argument, yes, I agree their argument is incoherent, and I would argue also intellectually disingenuous.
Well, what's the difference between that Scottish nationalism and British nationalism?
Well, British nationalism believes that we should have maintain the status quo, go back to the status quo, which was a constitutional monarchy, with our laws made in Westminster by an accountable parliament which can be sacked. And also, of course, you know the principle that a parliament is not bound by subsequent parliaments. And so you have a much stronger democratic input. Where the Scots, if I may just to finish this point, where the Scots are intellectually disingenuous, and I agree with you on this, is that they want to get rid of the London government, but are still happy for 75% of their laws to be made in Brussels. That is intellectually dishonest. So they should, if they want independence, which is a perfectly natural and reasonable thing, and I'm 1/16th Scot myself, perfectly reasonable, perfectly natural, but not that way. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, we'll come back to that 70% Brussels laws point in a moment, but you make the point that that a super state, as it were, a state that contains more than one nation, that the state that is not coterminous with the nation fails in some way. You just made a classical point yourself. The Roman Empire was an enormously successful confederation of many nations with one state, unburdened, as it happens, by the economic inefficiency of democracy, but run by a legislature and a magistracy that could not bind its successors, very much as a Westminster Parliament can. I would say that the Pax Romana was a success. As Gibbon said, it was the happiest time in human history.
Well, yes, and that's also a strong argument. I think you could possibly make the same case for the British Empire.
Well, take your pick. You can either have the sunshine or
yeah, it is a valid point, and I would think, of course, that the Roman Empire, of course, as indeed the British Empire was very liberal in its administration. So, for example, if you take India for the British Empire, it had an Indian civil service, it had a viceroy. India virtually had dominion status in its own right, in de facto, if not de jure. So, yes, and of course, don't forget the Romans were particularly, as indeed the centre of the British Empire was, significantly more scientifically advanced. Which of course had an impact. So the Roman Empire and the British Empire were civilizing factors. I wouldn't argue that Brussels was a civilizing influence.
But you are arguing for empire, or at least if not empire in terms of imperialism, then a super state containing many nations.
It can work if it's liberal.
Well, why aren't you advocating that then? Why are you advocating separatism rather than a reform of Europe
that isn't what is on offer. And of course,
well, I know you're retiring, so forgive me for blaming you on what's not your fault. But as a politician and a statesman and a leader of opinion, That's something that you might have been putting on offer.
Then you would have to have a look at the legal system. Of course, one of the problems that we have, or I would argue we have in the European Union, we have the legal system which is corpus juris, or the Napoleonic Code, which is prescriptive. That is totally against the principles of English law, which of course have been developed, common law and statute law, over 1,000 years, before Magna Carta. So the system of law doesn't suit you. There would have to be so many changes.
If the Italians and the Poles and the Danes decided that they wanted a common law system based on the statutes of King Edgar the whatever of Wessex, would you find Europe a more acceptable place to be?
No, I don't think I would, because I still prefer the idea of having a system where the lawmakers are elected and therefore sackable, no matter, as you quite rightly said, we would sooner be governed by, most people would sooner be governed by London, Englishmen and Brits, sooner be governed in London, even though they are incompetent, at least they are our own incompetent administrators.
But that is the essence of nationalism, isn't it? I'd rather be governed by my incompetence than somebody else's competence.
You would argue, I think you're implying that Brussels is competent, and of course I don't think many people would agree with that.
But I'm implying that there's a potential, a political project to make it competent, to improve the supranational
I think it's had long enough now. I think it's had long enough.
We'll come just quickly to that 70% of laws point that you made there. If that's the case, those 70% of laws are largely things like weights and measures, trading laws, standards that are necessary to be consistent internationally if it's ordered to facilitate international trade. There can't be many of those 70% laws that are particularly controversial, are they?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, for example, all food labelling, for example, comes out of Brussels, and I think you'll find that that leads to problems where, for example, we have had for many years a situation where you buy pork chops in the supermarket with a Union Jack on, and you find that they were actually packaged here, which under the European legislation on labelling means that they can put a Union Jack on. And you know that they've come from Hungary. You also know that their standard of welfare, animal welfare, is nowhere close to our own. So you're not actually buying what you think you're buying. So I don't believe in. Let's just look at some of the things here that Brussels actually legislates on.
Very quickly.
Okay, tractor seats, spirit bottles, windscreen wipers, duck eggs. I mean, the list is endless because it's a prescriptive system. So
why were you not busy advocating the opposite of these and the resolution of these absurdities as a member of the European Parliament?
Oh, well, we are. We vote against them every single time, of course. But we are still in a very much. There's only 8% of the Parliament is actually British at all, even if we all agreed. And of course, most of the main parties out there are noddy dogs.
Let's just bring this home to a more local level here. Austin Mitchell MP has said that he's standing down at the next general election for the constituency of Great Grimsby. There's much speculation that Nigel Farage, having turned down Newark in an upcoming by-election, that Nigel Farage would like to stand in Grimsby for the House of Commons at the next general election, probably next May. Why is Grimsby so attractive to the leader of UKIP?
Well, if you look at my vote in 2004, wearing the UKIP hat, 2004, 2009, we came top in the whole region, which is Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire, I would argue, not the Humber.
And North Eastern Lincolnshire.
Yeah, North East Lincolnshire. So we have a very, very strong vote. UKIP gets a very strong vote in North East Lincolnshire, very strong. And of course, it isn't such a thumping majority for Labour or Conservative here. It's not such a big mountain to climb. I don't think you'll stand here. I would be really surprised because he is fundamentally home counties man. I can't see him going down particularly well here in Grimsby, where they are.
Why not? We're a very civilised lot here.
I wasn't suggesting that Grimsby isn't civilised. What I'm suggesting is that I'm a Londoner myself, and I've lived up here long enough to know there is a north-south divide, and there's no point in pretending that there isn't a north, as you well know yourself. I'll
have to stop you there, Godfrey. Many thanks to Godfrey Bloom. Sadly, we must stop there. Please do tune in next time, and I'll be talking to Nick Dakin, MP for Scunthorpe, in the Labour interest. Until then, goodbye.